Welcome to the Holly Furtick YouTube channel. I wanted to give you a little sneak peek at something that we're doing at Elevation. It's a new mini-series with our small groups called Highlights, where I get together with a friend to discuss my husband's sermon from that week. We will talk in depth about our favorite highlights and discuss practical ways that we can apply them to our lives. Now, if you haven't seen the sermon from this week, go watch that on the Elevation Church YouTube channel. I'll put the link for you below so that you find the right one. Then come back here. For now, here's this week's highlights. I watch my husband every single week just give his all to bring us such an amazing word. And this week, I mean, once again, I was blown away. Now, he gave us two titles. And when I texted him right before we started filming this, I was like, which title did you end up picking? He said he picked both. So we're going to go with both. So the first title that he gave us was Rescue Your Testimony. And the second title that he gave us is The Proof is in the Puddles. And I just was so ministered to by this word. I know that you were too. He started off in Romans 5 and then ended in Joshua 4 where they were crossing over the Jordan River. But I actually told my husband when we were riding home, I was like, I love the way you opened the sermon today because you made me look amazing. You made me look like the most hopeful person in the whole world. And, you know, I try to be hopeful most of the time, but I thought it would be a great way to open up our discussion. Are you a hypothetical person or are you a hypothetical person? And joining me today, my guest is our executive pastor extraordinaire, Chunks Corbett. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Holly.
Chunks is not typically that keen to be on camera.
I don't want to be on any cameras,
yeah.
But for you, I'll do anything.
Well, because I said I want Chunks to come and discuss, because I always love talking to Chunks about Pastor Stephen's sermons.
So let's discuss this, Holly.
Okay, so we're going to start off with...
We're going to start off with him saying...
No. I already asked you a question. Are you a hypothetical
I'm asking you.
or a hypothetical person? We already know what I am.
I know, but here's the thing. Pastor said that he was the high priest of hypothetical. Uh-huh. And that you were the Royal Highness of hypothetical.
Yes.
And I would like to know, how does one become hypothetical? Because I am more in the other camp.
So you're hypothetical.
So coach us all.
You know, I don't know. I just think of the ways that it could go good. I mean, not always. Obviously, like I have my moments.
So yesterday when I saw the tennis ball on the ground in front of the stairs, and I thought, if I don't move this from the dog leaving it here, and Amy steps on it, breaks her ankle, compound fracture, bleeds out, phone's too far from her, she's gone.
Well, obviously...
Is that hypothetical or hypothetical?
I mean, that's just being smart, right? You love your wife and you don't want her to fall and break her neck.
I know, but what if it's in every situation and you see so many ways that it could go wrong?
Okay, so with my husband and I, though, this was also the context of what he was talking about, is I said, you know, you really do think through everything, because when we were talking about going on this little trip,
he does think through everything.
He was like, well, this could happen, and this could happen, and this could happen, and this can happen. And I was like, wow, you really do think through everything. Maybe we shouldn't go. I actually didn't say the maybe we shouldn't go part, but I did think it. I was like, yeah, this could end up not being a fun trip, but it could end up being fun, you know? So I don't know. I just try really hard to focus on the things that could go right. I mean, obviously, we need to see danger and
we need
situations.
More yous, but I want to know, the people back home, y'all can talk about it amongst yourselves. Which are you?
And I think that people, a lot of times, we're both, right? We have this quote from Kim. She said, most of the time, I feel like I'm more hypothetical. I consider myself as an encourager, but sometimes I'm better at believing things for other people than I am for myself. And I thought this was really great because it's true. Like, it's a whole lot easier to be hypothetical for someone else than it is to be for yourself, because you can really start to spiral into all of the things that you're doing wrong and all of the things that could go bad. And obviously, as a mom, I actually, you know, that now that I'm thinking about it, I think I'm more hypothetical for when it comes to my kids than I am for myself, because I do worry about all the things that could go wrong when you have teenagers.
Just because you're a great mom.
All right, so Pastor Stephen, he said, what do you do when you're in a flood moment and you need the faith to get through? So basically, what do you do? How do you be hypothetical? And he gave us 3 points. How do you be hypothetical?
I was just
How
gonna let you.
to be.
Just gonna let you roll with it. It's
How
all
to
good.
be hypothetical. And he told us anticipation, justification, and demonstration. And he walked us through all of these as we walked through Romans 5. And I really loved how at the end, I don't know if anybody caught on to this, but he said, and then after demonstration, the next time you have more anticipation
Right.
when you're going through all of these situations. So
Hope cycle of sorts.
a hope cycle of sorts. If you're an OG elevator, you would know
Just
that.
throw it out there.
I attempted to preach on Romans 5 one time, and I called it the hope cycle, but
Your
this
husband
was way
once
better.
wrote a song about Romans 5 on my couch in 2003.
He did. Do you want to
remember?
sing it?
I thought
Of course
about
I
it,
remember.
but, the people aren't ready for all that. But I kept singing it to myself today, and it was pretty fun.
All right, here's what Norman said. He said, lately my mind has been telling me lies. I worry about this, I worry about that, I think about what's next, I think about what I've been through. But what stood out to me was when Pastor said, I can think a lot of things, but I can only speak one. And what I want to speak out is God's truth. And I think that that is such an interesting thing that Pastor Stephen said, is how you can think a million things, but you can really only speak one thing at a time. And how when we focus, when we feel our mind just like spiraling into all of these hypothetical situations and these conversations, and honestly for me, I make up stories. So I may not think about what could go wrong, but I make up stories about what other people are saying, or I make up stories about what happened, or what then actually what did happen, or what could have happened. So when we speak God's truth, what is something, Chunks, that you do, or is there something that you say to really like speak God's truth when you feel yourself seeing all of these things that could go wrong? How do you bring yourself back?
You're putting me on the spot.
I am.
This is what y'all do in e-groups, put each other on the spot. It's a good thing. Uncomfortable is not bad at
This
e-group.
is for the guy who doesn't want to share.
No, I mean, obviously, when you start talking about this kind of thing, you go through stuff and you want to see something that not only that you're just trying to get through it or go through it, but you want to get something from it. And so, just to start cycle back over, when you remember back to something you've been through, or, been through some, go through some tragic stuff, or you experience some loss, and you see how you got closer to God through it, and you kind of think in the midst of it you might not. That might be the opposite effect, but you see how you got closer to God through it, so it kind of brings you back and grounds you in whatever you're going through currently, just to kind of know that you're going to get something from this.
Yep. And I feel like Pastor Stephen gave us these 3 quotes that I found all throughout my notes of how to really practically live this out. And I don't know if any of you out there are like Post-it note on your mirror kind of people, or you like to screensaver on your phone. But one of the things that I like is to have some of these quotes to really get me through when I'm having a moment like that. And so here were 3. Here's one of them. The pain proves the worth of your faith. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, is you go back to a moment where you go, oh, okay, like I have had moments where I've been through something hard, I've been through something painful, and those were the moments that I dug down in my faith, and I actually grew in my relationship with God. Here's the next one. My faith is not in how, but in who. And this one's really good for me because it helps me to remember that it's not how am I going to get through this, but who is walking through this with me. And when you remember that God is in it with you, then your faith is so much stronger. And then the last one, it's not a testimony until it's tested. And I think this is like, I loved how he talked about how the suffering is part, like, I know it's somewhere here in my notes, maybe it's in yours too, where he talked about how Jesus didn't save us from our suffering, he saved us from our sin.
Right.
And so suffering it's a part of it. It's a part of life. But as believers in Christ, it's not that we won't suffer. It's that we won't suffer alone. And that Christ is always with us through and in our suffering. So
Pastor's so good at that when he preaches, and being a Christian and giving your life to Christ doesn't mean that it's a genie and everything's going to be great.
Right.
He understands that people will still go through things, but trying to equip them like he did us today and me always, that when it does happen to you the next time,
then what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? And it's, God's going to come through like he did the first time. But when you're in it, you don't feel it. You don't remember it. So that's where you got to get some altitude and reflect on the last time. It's easier. It's harder than it sounds.
It is.
It's very difficult.
But this is his last point, or, well, one of sort of as he was closing, he said you should commemorate every crossing. And I love that. I thought it was such a powerful idea because, you know, he showed us how the Israelites were crossing over the Jordan, and they were going to cross over on dry land, and they were to get a stone for every tribe. And it was to commemorate what God had brought them through and what they were moving into. And I loved how he said that the stones were in the Jordan, but you could only see them in the low tide. Yeah. And so it's like in those low moments that we have, we're able to look back on the moments where we have crossed over. And those are the moments where our faith grows. And so I just have to get to the last thing, the thing that really touched me the most about this sermon was when he talked about how there's two sides to the story. So they're crossing over, Israel's crossing over, and he says, tell it from the other side. And he talked about how there's what you went through and there's what you got from what you went through. And which part of it are you going to tell? And it made me think about, you know, how there were things that my parents went through. My dad was a minister, and my parents went through a really difficult time in their church. And when they would tell me the story, though, they would tell it as something that God had brought them through, not as something that Pastor Stephen said that they were bitter about. And I thought about how powerful that is when we're having conversations, not only with our spouse or our children, but with someone else. Are you telling this story from a place of bitterness, or are you telling this story from what you got from it?
I think the quote was, I'm sick of this side of the story. That was the internalization to himself that God prompted him in. But it is true, because there's one way to tell it where you're still in the middle of it, you're still kind of mulling, and it's somewhat cathartic to tell it in a way that makes you feel like you're still suffering, because people will then have some empathy for you. But the reality is, they don't want to hear you gripe. They want to see what you've been through, so that they can kind of see you on the other side and what God did to come through. I love the illustration of the stones, and he talked about tribes, and then he equated it to, there are 12 tribes, and then he equated it to the trials, and so a stone for each tribe, and then a stone for each trial. Yeah. And so there's things that God's done in this church that we always talked about. Man, we need to put up some stones. We've never done it. We do it to an extent, like the loading dock. We're gonna put some stones out there and commemorate what God did. But it really was cool because he did it in two places. But I think it's always important to be able to have that snapshot of what God did in your life to be able to go back to for when you're going through the next thing. We're pretty good at snapshotting highlights of our kids whenever they do something great. Yeah. But I don't think we do as good of a job highlighting the things that God brought us through, because it just becomes like old hat. It's like, wait a minute, God brought you through that, and you want to remember only the positive moments. And sometimes the most positive things in our life are getting through something and God doing it. Yeah. So trying to remember that in the form of that stone illustration it's always been so visual for me. I loved it. And him bringing it back around, going from where we started to getting to the stones to the gospel. It was amazing.
It was an incredible
amazing message.
Presentation of the gospel altogether. Yeah. I hope that was helpful for you. It's so important to talk about what God is speaking to you, to let the seed of His Word get planted in the soil of your heart. If you want to hear the full conversation and participate as well, join an Elevation E-group. We have groups that meet in person and online, literally all over the world, and we would love to have you. To learn more, go to elevationchurch.cc and comment below. Let me know what some of your highlights were from this week's message. Thanks for joining me. Make sure you like and subscribe so that you'll get notified when next week's sermon discussion is available, and I'll see you back here next week.